Sioux City's corn palaces. This is always a fun topic, always a topic that I feel like generates a lot of interest. I first made this talk about 5 years ago, and it's never been part of our recorded series. And there's been so many times where I've said, well, we have a video on corn palaces, and I'm like, wait a minute, no, we don't. But now we will, because this will be on YouTube here in about a month or so after I give this to you. But you guys get to see it live, so this is going to be fun. I like talking about the corn palaces, not just because of the fact that it's a corn palace, and the very idea of that is just like fascinating and magical and so cool. But I love talking about the corn palaces because of what went on behind them, what these corn palaces meant to the people who built them and the people who see them, and just what they were all about on that point. What in the world is going on in Sioux City in the 1880s and 1890s that causes people to build a corn palace? What are they celebrating? So that's what I like to explore, and what a large amount of this talk is going to be about. But you are going to see lots of pictures of the palaces as well, I promise. Oops. So I went to, when I was in college, I had a roommate, and she was from Queens, New York, and we were talking about the places we grew up, the places that we lived, and I mentioned that, hey, my town used to build corn palaces back in the 1880s and 1890s, and her natural first question, this is the first question on this slide, why? And to really get into what these palaces were about and what is going on with this autumn festival, we have to travel back to the 1880s. And to help set the scene, this is a view of 4th Street looking east from Pearl right before the corn palaces. So at about 1885, you see the normal differences like the dirt streets and the boardwalks, all of the different buildings. But what I love about this image is that how busy it is. There's lots of people around downtown in Sioux City at this time. And there's always something going on. So here they're having a celebration. It's a parade for Ulysses S. Grant. And so that's the decorations and ribbons that you can see. But there was always something going on in Sioux City, and a lot of stuff going on. So, but why? What leads people to build a corn palace? Well, one cool thing Sioux City has going for it is the prevalence of our railroads. In 1883, we were pulling 50 trains a day over 4 different lines. Most of them are coming into this Union Depot and Hotel down at 2nd and Nebraska, kind of where the Municipal Auditorium is today, just behind that, the Long Lines Rec Center, just behind that. But the railroads are just, obviously in the Midwest, you're dependent on railroads. You're dependent on them for transportation and supplies and people and all of that such. But we have a lot of terminal lines here, meaning a lot of railroads are coming in and utilizing our shops that are here. You have the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Omaha shops up in the Floyd River Valley. You can see that image up there, built in about 1872. And these would be followed by the Milwaukee shops and the Northwestern, all of those familiar names. As Sioux City continues to grow, our railroads keep increasing, and that's absolutely crucial for life out here in the Midwest. We also have the expansion of industry. A lot of our manufactories and factories get their start in this time period. The Sioux City Foundry, you can see this image from 1871. It's going strong in this time period. And of course, the coup de grace, you have the foothold of our meat industry really excelling in this 1880s period. The Union Stockyards down in the, in the Stockyards area. I've circled in red there all of our packing houses. These are James Bogue, Silberhorn, Fowler, all of those names. And the yellow there is our exchange building. So the Livestock Exchange Building, and here you can see all of the pens for animals and such, and the rail lines coming through there. Now, this is not the stockyards that most people would remember, if you remember the stockyards at all. All of this was washed away in a flood, which I'll get to here in a little bit. But the point is, Sioux City's meat industry is really thriving and growing strong in this 1880s period, and that's bringing in a lot of money for Sioux City's economy. Now, I mentioned railroads bring people, and of course the industry expansion means those people have a place to work, and so Sioux City's population absolutely exploded in these 1880s period. And according to the federal census numbers, we had about 7,000 people in Sioux City in 1880, and just 6 years later, we're pushing 22,000. Of course, with all these new people coming in, we have to make houses, which means we have to grade all of those hills on the north and all around Sioux City that we have to go through. So here you can see Pearl Street in 1886, and they're grading those hills down so they can build even more houses on them and create an even more thriving business district. 1887 is a big year, by the way, because that's when Sioux City is going to turn 30. That is the 30th anniversary of Sioux City's incorporation with Iowa legislature. So when the Iowa law books actually actually said that Sioux City was a fully incorporated town. So there was a birthday coming up that we wanted to celebrate as well. Oops. But of course, we're in Iowa, we're in the Midwest, and we are absolutely nothing without our area farms. And in the 1880s period, we were enjoying an absolutely massive agricultural boom out here in western Iowa. In the eastern Iowa, you had blizzards and overgrazing and drought that was causing all kinds of problems with their crops and agriculture. We're out here in the west, we were pulling 30 to 40 bushels an acre. Now in modern numbers, that kind of sounds like small peanuts, but when you consider that this was the primary way of getting corn back in the day, these are hand-picked corn that is brought back to the homestead by wagons. This is a real farmstead that was near Sioux City. This is about 23rd and Nebraska Street today, if you can believe that. So just about 4 blocks south of St. Luke's Hospital. That's where this farmstead was once located. And the key point of this agricultural boom is Frank Peavy, who is that lovely gentleman over there. Frank Peavy had a grain empire that began in 1881 in Sioux City when he founded the F.H. Peavy Company. By 1884, he had moved up to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and started this probably the largest grain empire that North America had ever seen, definitely at least up until that point. This guy's company was so important, it invented the concrete silo. That's how important this guy was to agriculture in this area. And because he got his start here in Sioux City remained a key focal point for Peavy's grain empire. So we have a lot to celebrate on the agricultural spectrum as well. But also, even in the 1880s, Sioux City had built itself up a little bit of a reputation. The 1880s were a period of Iowa prohibition, not federal prohibition. That would come a little bit later, but Iowa state-mandated prohibition. And we had saloons everywhere, like the Northern Exchange Saloon down near the Stockyards area. I love this picture, by the way, because this kid standing right in the front right there, he can't be more than like 15. And just standing in front of the Northern Exchange Saloon. So we had that reputation of a kind of rough and tumble river town. This came to a head in 1886 with the shooting of Reverend George Haddock. Haddock was a prohibitionist minister here in Sioux City who had come to try to convince our local law enforcement to, enforce prohibition. And there was this whole big scuffle, and he was murdered on a street corner. So we had this reputation that we're trying to kind of sweep under the rug, as well as trying to celebrate all of the great things that are going on in Sioux City at the cusp of our boom era. So that's why we're building a corn palace, but who is going to be responsible for it? Well, on August 20th, 1887, all of these guys had a big meeting, spearheaded by these 3 guys up top. James Peavy, who was the younger brother of Frank Peavy of the Grain Empire, D.T. Hedges, a key developer of the North Side and the Stockyards area, and druggist C.G. Culver, who likes to be different and look the other way. These were kind of the spearhead, but all of these guys would have been involved. A.S. Garretson, from which we get Garretson Avenue down in Morningside and the Garretson Mansion, the former Morningside Library. He was heavily involved. John Hornick, a druggist. James Bogue, who was one of the key meat packers down in the Stockyards area. The mayor, Jonas Cleland, he of course was involved. And so all of these guys had a part to play in this big meeting on August 20th. And their original idea was something like this. They were thinking of, hey, we have some cool public buildings in town, and we're in Iowa, we're a place of corn is king here. Why don't we just decorate some of the buildings around town in corn stalks or in corn cobs and stuff like that, and kind of have this cute little decorative, fun, festive flair thing. But then, we look at other Midwest cities and what they were doing to celebrate all their cool stuff. You had the Veiled Prophet Carnival down in St. Louis, which I think still goes on, by the way. And of course, Minneapolis St. Paul does their ice palace thing in the winter. Now, according to legend, I'm not sure who exactly said it. Nobody agrees on who exactly said it. But according to legend, in a big meeting of this Corn Palace builders, these benefactors, somebody said the phrase, if St. Paul can have an ice palace, why can't Sioux City have a corn palace? And that was the idea that stuck. So where are we going to put it? Well, luckily, these guys are some of the richest folk in town, and they own a lot of property. We can't put it right in the middle of downtown because there's lots of businesses there. So let's do it just like north of downtown a little bit, so like along the 5th, 6th Street area, but still pretty close to downtown, so easy to get to. The first one was built at 5th and Jackson, just to the north of us here, and all of the rest were over at 6th and Pierce Street, where the Davidson building is today. All right. So we got a location. How in the world are we going to do this? Well, a local architect named E.W. Loft was hired to draw the plans for the Corn Palace, and he's like, guys, if we're going to do this, like, we're going to do this. We're Victorians, and so it's going to be like this giant, like, Gothic palace with flying buttresses and flagpoles and all this crazy stuff. If we're going to build a Corn Palace, we're going to make sure absolutely nobody who ever saw it is ever going to forget it. So you can see here, Loft's original design actually called for just a wood frame structure on then which corn would be used to decorate. So it's a wood frame building with corn decorations all around it. If that drawing looks familiar, you actually saw it as you walked into our museum today. Around our Corn Palace Theater is a model of Loft's original drawing of the Corn Palace. That model that you can see is about 1/3 of the scale of what the actual Corn Palace would have been. And our atrium's pretty big. So it gives you kind of an appreciation of what this Corn Palace, the size of what this thing would have been. This little fun photo booth that the kids like to take their pictures on is actually meant to replicate a ticket booth that sat outside of one of the Corn Palaces. So when you guys see that, or when you guys leave today, take a look at those. All right, so construction. It took 46 workmen 6 days to build a Corn Palace. I don't know any construction project lately that has taken that amount of time. Lumber, nails, rope, cloth, when they were all said and done, they had a 100-foot square building with a 100-foot tall tower. And they decided that was not big enough. So nearby was the Goldie Roller Rink, the old roller skating arena back in the 1880s, and they purchased that and turned it into both the executive and ticket offices. That's what you can see in this red square right here, to make that 210 feet. And it still wasn't big enough, because where are you going to put the carriages that are carrying the people to the Corn Palace? So this little thing built over the alleyway here, that's what that is for, is the bringing in the carriages, horse parking stables, so on and so forth. Here you can see an interior shot of the Corn Palaces and the construction and getting all that lumber put together. All right, so once it's built, then it is decorated. So it took 10 horse and wagon teams, 15 days to bring in the grain, all from local area farms. This included about 20,000 bushels of corn. This was yellow corn and what they called Indian corn. You can also call it maize or just the multicolored fancy corn. And there were lots of other cereal grains involved as well. It wasn't just corn, despite the fact of it being called a corn palace. And then this corn was handed to 300 decorators. A question I get very often, how in the world did they adhere the corn to the palace? Well, I don't exactly know, but I have a pretty good theory based on what I can see of the images of the palaces. You take your ear of corn, and then you saw that in half with a steam saw. And we know there were 2 steam saws on site during the construction. So when you cut the ear in half, you can then use nails to affix it to that wood frame structure. And so you can kind of see that's how most of the basic details were done, like this checkerboard stuff. That's how the large details were done. And then when you get to stuff like the murals, like this sheep and somebody who totally knew what a pig looked like, then you're talking individual grains of corn. And depending on how big your nails are, you could either nail those to the side or use some kind of glue or resin. So I don't know exactly how those were affixed onto this building, but that's my best guess, my best idea. But it took a team of 300 decorators to make both the outside and interior displays. A lot of those, especially the interior displays, were actually done by women's groups and all sponsored by local businesses here in Sioux City. Oops. Here's some of the interior shots. This is a kind of a fuzzy image because most of these are actually photographs of drawings, is what these are. But here you can see the front atrium. King Corn himself got to sit on a balcony and just like stare out over the Corn Palace, Corn Palace front there. And this area, this image right here, is really the only good interior shot I have of the 1887 Corn Palace. It was kind of dark in there. There were electric lights and stuff around, but it's kind of not enough light to take a lot of pictures of. So we don't have a ton of interior shots. You'll see more of the later Corn Palaces. And total investment for this Corn Palace, $25,000. Now, when I tell that figure to people, they're like, wow, that's a lot of money, especially in 1880s dollars. But like, I want to emphasize how much money that actually is. What could $25,000 buy you back in 1887? This is the Jens Nielsen house, built around that time. Perfectly normal, average home for the family of four. Your pretty typical middle class to even upper middle class house. That much money could have built 25 of those houses. 25 homes for Sioux City's exploding population that we instead chose to make a big building made out of corn. But it's the Victorian era. We got to talk about those Victorian mansions, right? You can't use figures for like the Pierce Mansion because that's made out of stone, so that was ungodly expensive. But something like the J.N. Knott House that was out at 914 Jackson Street, still is actually. That house is still there. That much money could have built about 2.5 wood frame Victorian style mansions. It could have also paid for 24 horse-drawn streetcars, which was our main form of transit back in this era, or laid almost 4 miles of track for those streetcars. That is how much money a Corn Palace cost to build. This is what they were spending their money, they could have been spending their money on, and what they had to lose if this whole Corn Palace idea did not pan out. So what happened? Well, there was a 5-day festival surrounding the Corn Palace, and during those 5 days, 140,000 people came to Sioux City and went through that Corn Palace. Now, estimated Sioux City population at the time was about 30,000, so that is the equivalent of the entire population of Sioux City going through the Corn Palace every single day. This is a shot of what the 1887 palace looked like. You've seen parts of it, but this is it in its full glory in its entirety. My favorite thing about this picture is this strange triangle thing you can see on the right-hand side there. So that is a gas light fixture that was used as decoration. And if you see my Powering Sioux City talk, or if you know anything about gas lights, you know that gas lights need flame. So you have like 100 tiny little glass bowls full of open flame surrounding a building covered in corn. No fires happened, which is amazing. No in the history of the Corn Palaces, there was never a huge fire that took the whole thing to the ground, and that is a miracle. So I keep mentioning festival. Well, yeah, the Corn Palace thing wasn't just about the building. It was about the events and stuff you do around it. So there's a different parade every single morning of the festival. Here you can see the industrial and military parades. Every single parade had a different theme and different floats connected to it. Oops. They did do the decoration thing for a lot of the buildings. So this is looking on Pierce Street. That's the Pierce block there. It's about where the Hatch Furniture Building, or I think it's like the Boathouse or something is the sign they put up. But that's about where that is. And you can see all these decorations on such. So, and the Woodbury County Courthouse had decorations, and City Hall and all that stuff. So you decorate Sioux City as well, not just the Corn Palace. There were concerts by local bands, the Knights of Pythias Band and Mose Reed Band. And with 1887 in particular, you had a couple other events. For example, we had the laying of the cornerstone of the P.V. Grand Opera House, which was over near 4th and Jackson Streets. This was one of Sioux City's first big theater venues, and that was laid out in 1887. But you had races, you had fireworks, you had balls, you had drills. There was even a war dance performed by Native Americans as part of this festival. So there was a lot going on, a lot of things you could do besides just go see the palace. And of course, the best thing is souvenirs. All of the photographs you're seeing today were mostly made by local photographers like J.H. Hamilton, who then printed them into books like that black book you see up there, and then gave those out as souvenirs. So photographs were a key souvenir. You also see these medals everywhere, the Corn Palace medals. They're made out of metal, so they're nice and well preserved, so you'll see those around as well. But they had everything: paperweights, candles. That is, I believe, like a lamp cover made out of corn. This is a little pair of opera glasses that had corn images on them. Just all kinds of stuff. Some of the major attendees included the President of the United States. Yeah, Grover Cleveland and his wife were doing a tour of the western U.S., and they came into Sioux City, and Cleveland commented, "This is the first new thing that has been shown me." These two guys are railroad magnates Cornelius Vanderbilt and Chauncey Depew. These are some of the richest men in the United States at the time period, big, huge railroad owners. And Depew mentioned that, "I have been all over the world nearly, and I never before saw a corn palace." And this corn palace was everywhere. National publications like Frank Leslie's and Harper's Weekly, they were all talking about it. We had local people talking about this as well. And I love E.P. Heiser's quote in his Sioux City Illustrated. This was made 1 year after the Corn Palace, but he was talking about it. And only a Victorian newspaper editor could describe a corn palace as Aphrodite sprang from the ocean's foam. Gotta love these Victorians. So, 1887, great, awesome, corn palaces work, let's do it again. What a lot of people I've found don't realize is that the corn palace was never meant to be a permanent structure. At the end of the festival, all of the corn was stripped off and given back to local farms, usually to feed cattle. All of the lumber was stripped down and used in other building projects, and then every single year after that, they built a brand new one with a whole new design from the ground up. So this is what the 1888 Corn Palace looked like. Its festival was in late September and early October. This was also designed by E.W. Loft and built by a local contractor named A.F. Cox. This one's bigger, 150 feet square with a 90-foot tower, so it's not as tall, but it's quite a bit bigger. So it took up a whole quarter block of the area that it was at Pierce Street. Here you can see a pin of James Mahoney. He was secretary of this Corn Palace, and some close-ups of some of the murals on the outside of the 1888 Corn Palace. And so this one was over twice as expensive. This one cost $60,000. So remember how much money $25,000 was in the 1887 Corn Palace. This was over twice that. But the attendance knocked it out of the park. 350,000 people came through this thing throughout the festival days of 1888. It was nicknamed the Temple to Mondamin, which is a Native American god of corn, and also nicknamed the eighth wonder of the world. This is one of the few paper posters that we have for the 1888 Corn Palace. We're lucky that it's survived in such great condition. So that was one of the paper, and then this is the front atrium inside of the 1888 Corn Palace there. Yes, sir? Yes, yep. So people always ask, how much did it cost? Well, it kind of depends on the year. I've seen figures anywhere from $1 to $1.50 all the way up to $3. So it kind of depends on what package you buy, just like anything else. This is more interior shots of the 1889 Corn Palace. Like I said, we have more interior shots as we go on. Here's a corn living room, complete with a corn fireplace. Don't think about that too closely. And who doesn't need a corn spinning wheel that actually worked, according to legend, or a corn clock and corn china cabinet? 1888 also had the Corn Palace train. So this was a real functioning working train that left Sioux City. It had 5 cars, all decorated in corn, and it left Sioux City with 90-plus passengers, mostly businessmen who were going out to promote the palace on this train. And so you're on the Corn Palace train, and you're heading out to Chicago. You go through Dubuque, you go through Galena, and you hand out all these cute little souvenirs. You get your appearance in the Chicago Tribune. The train was actually going to Chicago to visit the Republican National Convention that was going on there. So they wanted to invite all of these delegates to say, hey, come to Sioux City, come check this out, it's really cool. Spread posters like this and such. But again, think about this for just a second. Corn Palace train. Okay, how does a train move? You burn coal and it making decisions. So there's a fire going on in the engine all the time, and your train is covered in corn. There's a great line from J.R. Catherines, who is a newspaper editor who rode on the train, and when they pulled into the station, they were late. They were about 2 days late. And they asked Catherine, like, why are you late? What happened? He's like, late? You're lucky we got here at all. We have survived 7 great conflagrations. You can't argue with a word like conflagrations. We got so used to fires that Colonel Macomb called fire just as calmly as he called breakfast. But 1888, super, awesome, great. Let's do it again. Here is the 1889 Corn Palace, a little bit longer festival this time, 23rd to October 5th. This one was also a bit wider, to where we actually had to allow access for Pierce Street and for the Pierce Street streetcars. So you can see this tunnel over here on the left side. That's what that tunnel is for, is to allow traffic through onto Pierce Street. This was the last palace designed by E.W. Loft, and it was built by local contractor E.C. Wakefield. 240 feet long. Again, we had to cross over into Pierce Street. 120 feet deep, and a massive, whomping 200-foot tall tower. This one also cost about $60,000 estimated, and included special visitors like the New York 71st Regiment Band and 100 capitalists personally invited to Sioux City by A.S. Garretson. Here you can see the front atrium of the 1889 palace, and again, some of the Corn is King and other such murals that you can see decorating the outside. But I want to talk about this tower, because this tower is the best thing about this Corn Palace. So inside of that main tower was Sioux City's very first elevator. It was a mechanical elevator that would actually take you up to a little terrace, which you can see here, these little rounded windows. There was a terrace there with refreshments and such. But if you were brave, you could climb a staircase to this hanging balcony that I've circled up there in red. And one Sioux City photographer climbed up to this balcony and took the closest thing to aerial images that you can get in 1880. So 200 feet in the air, and he just took pictures of the town as he saw it. So the following slides that you're about to see are the images that this photographer took. So looking off to the southwest, here you have the old Sioux City Journal building, the Lurch building at the time, which housed the City Hall offices. They didn't have a proper building yet, though that would come soon. Pearl Street is right through here, and you have Prospect Hill there in the background. At the time, a very, very swanky neighborhood. There's no combination bridge yet. The combination bridge would kind of come up to where these Fletcher and Case warehouses are, but it, of course, wasn't built yet. So we do have a pontoon bridge, and you'll see that in one of the other images here. Turning off to the other side, you have the southeast. So way in the background, you can see those big white buildings of our meat packers, the packing district. And right near there, nestled into the Missouri River bottom, is a working class neighborhood called the South Bottoms. A lot of people who lived there were employees of either the packing plants or the railroad yards that were down in that area. The Metropolitan block here marks 4th Street going along here. And the Metropolitan was Sioux City's first skyscraper, located at the corner of 4th and Jackson. And right next to it there is that P.V. Grand Opera House that I mentioned in the 1887 slide. This little thing on Jackson here, right where the parking ramp is today, right behind the hotel, was Sioux City's first high school. They called it Old Hunt, back before Hunt lent his name to the Hunt Elementary School. But this is our first high school down in this area here. Looking straight south from the Corn Palace, of course, you can see that beautiful Iowa Bank building, the original Davison Brothers department store. This area right here along 2nd Street near 2nd and Douglas, so kind of where Stony Creek is today, that was the Sioux Dan, kind of a red light saloon district of that ilk. Yeah, so that is still going on. There's that pontoon bridge that I mentioned going over into Covington, Nebraska, what is today South Sioux, which were originally 2 towns, and that town there is Covington. And turning around and looking straight north up Pierce Street from the Corn Palace, there you can see the old Armstrong School. That was our grammar school. This house over here on your right is the James Follett House. The Castle on the Hill Central High School would eventually be built on that lot just a few years later. Trinity Lutheran Church, Pierce Street going up through here. You can see this cut in the hill there. That's, again, about 23rd, 24th Street is where that cut is. And you can just see how much they're having to dig down into that hill, grade that hill down so they can run a street up through there. The Grandview Park, the reservoirs that are today in Grandview Park, or were in Grandview Park, they're right up there on the far edge. And the Victorian neighborhood of Rose Hill is over there on your extreme left. 1889 had the revival of the Corn Palace train. It traveled all the way out to Washington, D.C., and made kind of a tour of the East Coast, gathering people, spreading the word about the Corn Palace before it came home. I don't know how many conflagrations that one had, but I'm sure it was quite a few. All right, and the 1890 Corn Palace. Boy, this thing is a behemoth. We're going for like a Turkish theme, kind of a Turkish style. Change it up a little bit and have a little difference. And again, this one had an even longer festival, going all the way until nearly mid-October. So this one was designed by Charles Porter Brown. He was another prominent local architect here in Sioux City. He had numerous projects around town even already. And when I say this thing is behemoth, I mean it is 264 feet square with a 170-foot tall, 2-foot tall tower. I kind of ran the numbers as best as I could, and to my knowledge, this is the largest Corn Palace in terms of interior area. So the part you could actually like go inside and walk around and see stuff. This one had more area than you could explore, where a lot of the others were just like a smaller interior building with like a bunch of decorations and such around it. But this one had a quite extensive interior area, and this one cost $100,000. But it had a 100-square-foot auditorium to hold events in. And according to legend, I've never seen a photo of this, but it supposedly had a 30-foot tall Niagara Falls near the front entrance in its atrium. And the attendance for the 1890 Corn Palace, just shy of 100,000. Which is, I mean, that's still a lot of people, but that was less than the first one, the first and the smallest one. So this is this biggest and most expensive Corn Palace yet, and it just did not have the attendance that they wanted to. Cool thing about the 1890 Corn Palace, though, is it brought H.O. Woodruff to Sioux City. Woodruff was an electrician from Chicago, and as I mentioned before, all of the Corn Palace had some kind of electric lighting. Not a lot, but they definitely had electric lights. But any of the generators and equipment they were using didn't stay here. They all went back to wherever they were rented it from. Woodruff specifically built generators, light bulbs, electrical equipment, all for the 1890 Corn Palace. Actually, on display, we have these two generators, and then there's a little light bulb that he was using. So Woodruff was a big deal because he stayed here and then made all kinds of electrical devices for Sioux City, and he was brought here for the 1890 Corn Palace. All right, so the attendance wasn't what we wanted, but it is not the Sioux City way to just give up. And so they're like, hey, you know what? Let's go really crazy. And I mean like really crazy. So here you can see the 1891 Corn Palace, the last Corn Palace, whose festival stretched almost an entire month, October of 1891. This right here is Pierce Street, and it takes up this whole quarter block and this whole quarter block. So this one was also designed by Charles Porter Brown. It was built by a local contractor, Joseph Payette, 380 feet long, with a 150 feet deep and a 228-foot tall tower, complete with a cornucopia, because who doesn't need a cornucopia on top of the building? That's amazing. I freaking love that. Actual interior area was only estimated around 57,000 square feet. So a lot of what you're seeing here is just decoration. It's not actually parts of the building that you can walk through. It's mainly just one huge central auditorium and then a couple display rooms in the wings. But still, this is still impressive. It's still using over 1 million feet of lumber and 40,000 bushels of corn, and its total investment is about $70,000, plus an extra $4,000 just to advertise. Here are some interior shots of the Corn Palace. This is right near the atrium. This is all of H.O. Woodruff's stuff, all of his electrical gadgets, the light bulbs at the time, these light fixtures up here. He had some generators and light bulbs on display. According to legend, from what I've read, he also had an electric kettle that made corn coffee. And I have no idea how that works because there's no caffeine in cornmeal, so I don't know if he was mixing it with I don't know how that worked. But according to Woodruff, he had a kettle that can make corn coffee, and he was using it at the Corn Palace. This is one of the side rooms called the Egyptian Room. I got my love of history from studying ancient Egypt, so of course I have to include that image because it makes me so happy. This is the main central auditorium. We actually had some performances here by the Mexican National Band. They were brought up from Mexico at a cost of $7,000 to come play concerts here at the Corn Palace Festival. You're up in one of the atrium levels. I think this is just a small mezzanine level above the auditorium, but you're standing on that mezzanine kind of looking out over the main stage. And attendance on this one, 75,000. So natural to ask, why? What is causing people not to buy into this Corn Palace thing anymore? Well, there's a few reasons. One, it's waning novelty. So Sioux City had the first Corn Palace, but it wasn't too long before other people and other towns in the Midwest caught on to this whole grain palace thing. Not all of them were of corn. Some of them were of wheat or other cereal grains. But this idea of building palaces out of your natural resources is starting to catch on. And so Sioux City's not the only one doing this anymore. The weather was also really, really bad. We can certainly relate to that today with all that rain and thunderstorm outside. But one of the editors of the newspapers said, "This is fine weather for polar bears and ducks, but not for corn palaces." When the festival was over, the entire Corn Palace was totally stripped down and sold to a real estate developer, H.H. Bulkwalter, for just over $1,000. Sioux City still wasn't ready to give up on the Corn Palace thing. There were actually plans and all kinds of festival dates laid out for the 1892 Corn Palace. This is the only surviving design that I am aware of, also designed by Charles Porter Brown, and you kind of see we're going back to what was working in the 1890s. We want to just make it even grander and bigger, and just like, if we keep going hard enough, maybe this Corn Palace thing will get some of that magic back and recapture that spirit. But 1892 is the start of some pretty troubled times in Sioux City. Again, number one, we have other people going into this palace thing. Ottumwa had their Corn Palace thing going on. That started in 1890. 1892 also saw the second worst Floyd River flood in Sioux City history, the worst, of course, being 1953. But the second worst was back in 1892. This is actually on the eastern end of what is today historic 4th Street. So this is the Heidman Law Firm building right here. And that's the old Hotel Gordon. You can see back then they had cedar paved streets, so these are all cedar pavers floating away in the floodwaters. This flood was so expensive and so disastrous that they're like, maybe Corn Palace, not the best thing this year. We'll try for next year. Well, by 1893, the economic panic of 1893 had set in. This absolutely decimated Sioux City's economy because a lot of its eastern investors were either out of money or pulled their money out of Sioux City and kept it back at home. So a lot of businesses failed, a lot of people went out of business, a lot of people left Sioux City. And since then, Sioux City has not built another Corn Palace. We've tried. During Rivercade, several times during Rivercade, there was propositions of like, hey, let's do a Corn Palace thing. Let's, kind of reawaken that old spirit. Unfortunately, we can't clear it with the fire marshal. So, yeah, I don't know if another Corn Palace will be in the cards for Sioux City or not, but it hasn't been yet so far. Of course, everybody asks, what about Mitchell? Well, yes, Mitchell, South Dakota totally copied our idea in 1892 and built their own Corn Palace. It was just like Sioux City's, a temporary wooden structure covered in corn and decorated in corn. And at the end of the festival, it was torn down. Now, they didn't build a Corn Palace every single year, but it was enough years like through the 1890s and into the teens and into the 19-teens anyway. They built several different corn palaces with several different designs, had several different festivals. In about 1920, some developers said, nuts to this, let's make a permanent structure. This is way too expensive to tear down and rebuild every single year when we want to have a festival. So in about 1920, they built a permanent structure that has been kind of added and improved to over the years. But that is the structure that you can go see in Mitchell today. So that is a permanent structure that has corn mural decorations on the outside, and those do change periodically. I think they still change those every year for their annual town festival. And there's all kinds of cool decorations inside. There's a big auditorium and such in there. So yes, Mitchell, South Dakota is today the Corn Palace City. But we got the idea first. So what about after the Corn Palace? It's really sad. We have an economic panic, and how do we come back for this? Well, Sioux City did not lose its festive spirit. Starting in the late 1890s, you have the Mondamin carnivals. These were big Mondamin these are big carnivals dedicated to Mondamin, again, that native god of corn. There were parades and circuses and all this kind of stuff. So there's no corn palace. It was still a kind of a big fun event. And these eventually followed with the interstate livestock fairs in the early 1900s and into the mid-1920s. The interstate livestock fairs were exactly what they sound like. Imagine the Iowa State Fair or a similar sized state fair, but instead of one state, you have 5. So people from all over this area, from Minnesota and Colorado, Nebraska, the Dakotas, they all came here and showed off livestock. They showed off agriculture. They had home shows. There were automobile races and all kinds of stuff going on here. That is kind of the real spirit that revitalized what the corn palaces were trying to do, which was celebrate Sioux City and celebrate who we are. And on that note, I want to leave you with one final quote. This is from Neil Miller, who was a reporter with the Sioux City Journal in the 1940s. And when he was talking about the Corn Palace, he said, "The men who built the corn palaces did their work on faith and built their palaces out of dreams, with no guarantee that they would be paid for." These guys who built these corn palaces, those people who met on that August night in 1887, had no idea that this was going to pan out. They weren't thinking about what was going to make them the most money or what was going to what was going to be the most beneficial for them. They wanted to cry out into the world that we are here in Sioux City, we are proud of who we are proud of what we accomplished, and we deserve recognition for that. And there's no better way to get attention than to build a giant building made out of corn. So thank you guys so much for coming out and for braving the weather. It was awesome. Again, I love talking about this stuff. So if you guys have any further questions or comments, I'm happy to answer any. But thank you guys so much.